Welcome back to the Adaptive Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Hotho. On today's episode, we're talking with Brett Horchar. Brett was the two-time CrossFit Games champion in the Neuromuscular division in 2021 and 2022, and won the Standing Diagnosed division at the WheelWOD Games in 2023. Brett, welcome to the show. So glad you're here.
Great to see you, Matt. Thanks for having me on the show.
Of course, dude. I'm so glad you're here because you are a perennial CrossFit Games athlete. One of the first we've had on the show who's been on the podium. I love it.
It's a great thing to be on here. So just thank you for having this and having this open platform to start to just build more awareness to different adaptive athletes.
Of course. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about you. You have MS. You're the first person we've had on the show with MS. I don't think our audience is as familiar with it as you certainly are. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So MS is an autoimmune disease, is a disease that has permanent damage to the brain and spinal cord. So what that does is it affects how your brain can translate the electronic signals down to your muscles. That helps trigger when they need to flex, when they need to work, when they need to release. So that is why people with MS usually have a lot more challenges in their outer extremities, just because those areas are further away from the brain. So the signal is harder for it to reach and the signal starts to die as it goes along there.
And neither of us are medical experts, but you're an expert on living with it. So I appreciate an example that you shared with me before we started recording about comparing it to cancer, not glibly, but kind of in how it's treated similarly in some ways and how it affects your body. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So as far as MS goes, it's an autoimmune disease, much like a lot of people hear about autoimmune diseases. And the big one they think about is cancer, right? So what an autoimmune disease does, and once again, not a medical expert, just like Matt said, but I do believe that we have a cell inside of our body that are referred to as B cells. And those are the ones that attack foreign invasion, whether it just be like an infection, they go to heal your wounds at the site. They go to make sure that your body gets healed in whatever way it needs to, right? Well, then you take MS and cancer that are autoimmune diseases. So what does this mean is as those B cells go to attack the foreign invasion, instead of healing yourself from it, those B cells now are attacking this autoimmune disease. So it will go ahead and take the MS or the cancer and whatever DNA it has to develop that and replicate it into those B cells to spread the disease. So that is where a lot of people end up getting put on different chemotherapy treatments to go ahead and reduce the B cells inside the body. So that way there is a less chance of replication inside the body as people are going through different treatments there.
So as someone with MS, you're currently on chemotherapy?
Correct. Yes. I take Ocrevus. It's an infusion that when I first started, it was about a 6-hour long infusion that I had to get every 6 months. As time went on, and I've been doing it for 7 years, come March 17th, it's a long time.
Wow.
It's now up to 9 months. So they extended it because I get blood work done before every infusion to see where my B cells are at. And since they're still saying that they're staying low to where they want them to be, then they're able to go ahead and progress it into a 9-month span before I have to go ahead and get treatment again.
And so what's some of the ways that this autoimmune disease affects your body? I mean, you talked about it impacting the extremities, but let's put it in the context of what we do in the CrossFit space, right? So how does it impact when you're in the gym doing a workout? Let's say you're doing Fran or maybe a longer workout. Let's say you're doing Murph. Let's take two ends of the spectrum, right? What's going to happen to your body when you're doing those kind of workouts?
Absolutely. So the best way I can describe it is that MS people have to treat their body like it's a battery, right? If a battery is kept under a steady utilized condition, usually it's going to be okay. It might get a little warm, right? But it can still continuously work. Whereas if you take that battery and you try to pull as the highest amount of power out of that battery as possible in one go, that battery might have a meltdown. That battery might just completely short circuit. It might shut down the system that's trying to power. And that's the best way I can describe what happens. That is why heat is also a huge factor in what affects people with MS, because now if you overheat a battery, you're now adding sunlight and it's out in the hotness, right? That increases the core temperature of that battery to then exacerbate the symptoms quicker. So take, for example, like you said, Fran. Fran is a very sprinty workout. It does require high power output, of course, anyone across the board doing friend is going to be like, oh, yeah, well, it definitely it affects me. Well, I could tell you that there are people who have MS who probably do Fran and they can't walk for 30 minutes,
Yeah.
or they might go into an episode where they have issues with their body that they need it to be super cold or brought down to normal regulating temperature to make sure that it can just process and function normally. Other things is that based on the extremities and how much that utilizes a little bit of grip as well, you might see their hands start to claw up, or they can't open their hands, or their legs are just going to not work. There's multiple things that could happen by overheating that battery too quick. Now, if we go into the other spectrum of Murph, which happens to be one of my favorite workouts, believe it or not, that might have been actually one of the first CrossFit workouts I did unknowingly before it was even a thing in CrossFit. And that one, because it's nice and steady, right? Pull-ups, push-ups, air squats, they're not super high power output, especially if you're looking at people doing it from like 40 minutes to an hour. It's a nice, steady workout. If you happen to have a bad Memorial Day and it's super hot, it could have its moments, but overall, because that one is a long, steady workout, usually people with MS will do relatively okay. Maybe if you have a more severe form of MS, your grip might get a little bit taxed with 100 pull-ups, or like legs might get a little shaky with the squats. But overall, since it's just a continuous motion, usually it's a little easier to handle than trying to compress a massive amount of work into a small time frame.
When you fatigue, do your muscles lose power? I mean, obviously our muscles lose power when we fatigue, but I'm speaking more from a neuromuscular adaptive standpoint. My only example is as someone with CP. When I fatigue, I'll fatigue unevenly on my right side, but then like the muscles will almost lock up on the right side, like it's spastic. So they won't push, or on a push-up, I'll lose the ability to push through them. Thinking of Murph again, right? Hitting that wall in the push-ups, which we all hit the wall in the push-ups, able-bodied or not, in Murph. But what does that look like for your body then when it starts fatiguing muscularly?
So, right. A couple things that can happen. One is my legs, instead of fatiguing and not being able to work in the sense of they get tired, right? Or maybe it just can't press. My hands, one side of it, will actually just start to lock. So it's almost like they become super flexed because now the muscles have been sent so many brain waves and electric waves from the brain that now it's like stuck and it won't stop. Right.
Okay.
Or on the other end of the spectrum, your legs will start to stay flexed and it'll feel like you can't walk because now it just feels like they're filled with cement and you're about to just fall over because you don't know if they're going to bend, extend, relax, like stay extended, whatever it may be, just to go ahead and try to help those muscles relax, right? Whenever you have those issues going on.
Yeah. So you said you've been on your chemo for 7 years. So let's back up 7 years then, because at some point you didn't have symptoms of MS. There was a time when this was not, which is crazy for me to think about, having grown up with this. But so I always want to dive into that with guests who are on this show, because whether it's a traumatic accident where you lose a limb or a diagnosis like this where you lose the ability to generate power that you had generated before. So walk me back to, I guess it would have been 2018. Yes. When something happened. So what was it like when that quote something happened?
Yeah, it was the weirdest and absolutely one of the scariest situations in my entire life. I ended up going to the hospital for this situation. It wasn't just as people have seen me more recently, have like an episode during an event, right? So I had been working out for probably the better half of my life. At that point, I was 21, so I was probably been working out since I was 13 at that point, just doing general fitness things to keep my body active, played soccer, just did what anyone would do who didn't think they had MS. Mm-hmm. So one day I was a trainer at Planet Fitness at this time. My right leg started to just feel funny, started to feel like I had to think about how to bend it and extend it every single time I had to take a step. Then the left side of my body on my leg felt like I had a heater on my body, since temperature is a big regulator in MS. And I was sitting down at that point when I felt that, and I looked over because there was a wall right next to me, and I'm like, oh, this heat vent's really kicking. And I look, I'm like, there is no vent to get off any heat in this situation here. So I'm like, that's kind of odd. So I go ahead, I go about my day. A lot of people know me because I was at that Planet Fitness 40 hours a week, and they just saw something was off in how I was walking. I'm like, yeah, I don't know what's going on, but it'll be better by tomorrow, right? That's whatever. Good night's sleep, I'll be good.
Yeah.
Next day came, and it was a Friday, and it was still there. Maybe slightly worse. Nothing too crazy at this point. And I figured it was my early day. I'll go to a Med Express, just have them get an idea what's going on and see what happens. Go to the Med Express after work, and they say it's something in my sciatic nerve from the sounds of it. And with all my experience with working out, I've had issues where, like, your sciatic nerve gets pinched. You just do one too many reps in a hinging position, or you pull wrong just because you tried to go a little too heavy, and maybe something just gets tight and you have some sciatic issues that release after like a week, right? This didn't feel like that. So they prescribed me a steroid, and they said, hey, if you happen to like lose bladder control or have any other issues, I would go to the hospital. All right. So then I'm at home now, and it is the next day. It is St. Patrick's Day. This is why I always remember it, because I just turned, or no, this is the first St. Patrick's Day that I was 21. So I was like, oh, let's go out.
Let's go
do
have some fun.
things. I'm like,
yeah.
I'm like, okay, you know what? Sure. Like, why not? And then they're like, well, because you can't really walk the best, maybe you should just like stay home and chill. I was like, all right, that's fine. Great. Sounds good to me. I never really cared too much for like massive amounts of drinking of any sort, but I was like, you know what? We're just going to chill. That's fine.
Yeah.
So I ended up staying home, and I'm walking around, and I feel like I'm just carrying a dead piece of wood in my right leg now. Like, it is like all my weight's on my left leg. I'm like pivoting it over, trying to like swing it to walk. And then one step in the wrong direction, and I fall, and I'm on the floor, and I'm out for like short period of time. Like, I laid flat, probably just closed my eyes. So I'm like, what just happened?
Did you have a concussion, or did you just like pass out?
No, just no concussion. I misstepped.
Okay. Gotcha.
Misstepped so bad with my right leg that I had so much weight on it, because I was so used to using my left leg to hold everything, that it just like toppled me over.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get myself. So then, for whatever reason, in that same moment of getting to the ground, when I came to and was just like up over and was like, all right, so that just happened. I look at my right hand, and I had the claw hand, where my grip was just so intense that everything just started to come together, and it created that claw hand syndrome. I know that in cerebral palsy, that's also a big thing that they talk about. So now something's wrong, right? Like something is horribly wrong, and I have to go to the hospital. So it's St. Patrick's Day. My family was out with another family, that close family friends. And I call them, and they're like, well, we have this person who's, we know they're at this house. Go ahead, give them a call. It was a friend at the time. Her name's Sammy. I give Sammy a call, and she'll be there. And we'll go ahead and have her take you to the hospital. Great. Call Sammy. She picks me up, takes me to the hospital. And then I'm sitting there. And at this point, I can't walk. Like, I get put in a wheelchair to get wheeled into the hospital because I can't physically move my right leg no matter how much I try.
And you look like an incredibly fit person, right? I mean, like, you've been working out. Like, I don't mean to like, build you up to be something more than you aren't, but like, I mean, you had been working out at this point, right? Like, you're fit, right? But you can't walk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Correct. So it was a very odd phenomenon. They're like, this guy takes care of himself. Why is he in a wheelchair? Like, this is such a weird thing to see. So I go into the hospital, I get checked in. They're like doing all these tests on me. I had 3 MRIs, 2 CAT scans, and then a spinal tap. And they figured out that I had the lesions in my brain that showed that I have multiple sclerosis. And the crazy thing with that was, when they saw the MRI that showed the lesions, they ended up being able to see prior lesions that weren't as big or as bright as this one. Because on the MRI, you see the brain, and most of it looks like a darker gray. If there is newer brain matter, it's kind of a lighter gray. And then where I had the massive attack, it was a big white star, is essentially what it looked like on my brain, because of what that turned into. So you could see there was prior lesions, and then the one that was happening / just happened, they had this big white star on it that just, you would have thought it was like a night sky from what you saw on that.
Yeah.
So that was when they said, you have multiple sclerosis. And they said, but you've had it for years. They asked me if I had ever had anything similar or experienced anything like this in the past that I could remember. And all I could remember was there was one day in eighth grade in soccer practice where I had now been working out for like 2, 3 years. And during that whole summer, I lifted weights 3 days a week, ran 3 days a week. So it should have been completely fine. It's eighth grade soccer practice. They ended up having us do a scrimmage drill. And I could not run for the life of me. I felt like I was leaning my chest forward for my legs to start picking up to almost catch myself. However, that was a 1 day fix. After that, was home, slept, ate, and I was fine the next day. So I never thought anything of it. But looking back after I had that diagnosis, I said, well, maybe that was like a small attack that was the start of everything.
Okay, so after this diagnosis, when did you go back into the gym? When did you end up back in the gym and start working out again?
Sure. So I had to go through a week of heavy steroidal infusion treatments to start because they wanted to first get my leg and arm back to functioning. So after going through that, and while going through that, I was on a walker and I would just practice walking through the hospital, make sure that I could start to learn how to walk again, and then figure out how to use my right hand again. I had some OT appointments and I had some PT appointments scheduled throughout my stay at the hospital there. I was at the hospital for a week. It was actually funny. They ended up calling me muscles there because they'd see me get up at 5 a.m. with my shirt off, of course, because I'm, a CrossFit athlete. And I want to go ahead and just start using my walker. I would do my laps around the hospital. They gave me a little resistance band. I would sit in a chair. I would wrap it around the bottom and I'd do bicep curls, or I'd wrap it around the back and I'd do some chest press.
Yeah.
And that was pretty much what I did in that week in the hospital. And then as soon as I was out of the hospital, it was either that same day or the next day I went to the gym. I said, I'm going headfirst into it. I'm not going to waste time. I want to make sure that I go and do this.
And so what was that first workout like after your diagnosis?
So at the time, I loved how powerful a clean made me feel. So what I did was I took an empty bar and I started doing cleans with an empty bar. And I would do a clean. I would try to do a front squat, and they were slow. They went through the motion and they simply let me feel what I loved about a clean again, was to just feel the power of what it felt like to bring something from the floor up to my shoulders. And then I remember I wanted to test the limits a little bit. So then there was a mini turf field and I would go ahead and try my hardest to run. And this run probably looked like Forrest Gump with all his braces on trying to run. That's how good at running I was whenever I had my diagnosis at the very beginning. I tried to make my way down the field at a steady rate. And once I made it to the end, I said, let's turn around. We're going to try to go faster. So then I went a little faster, then turn around again, go a little faster, turn around again, go a little faster. Went through that until I tried to go too fast. And lightning bolt zap just kind of hit me and I tripped and I fell to the floor and said, okay, this is our start.
Yeah.
Here's where I'm at, and we can only go up from here.
That's right. We've got a new baseline.
New baseline.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, I think there's so many neuromuscular athletes, especially, who can relate to that, who weren't born with it, but had to experience that loss of power, of ability, and then rediscovering what a baseline looks like. And I imagine that work that you had to do between the ears was just as hard as the work you had to do physically.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Just to adapt to your new baseline, but try to push your baseline to get to where you want it to be, was definitely one of the craziest and most humbling things that I ever went through, with never thinking that I would have something as simple as walking taken away from me after 21 years of living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So fast forward 3 years, you compete in the 2021 CrossFit Games.
Yes.
In the neuromuscular division. Is that right? Is that what it was back then?
That is correct.
All right. And we'll breeze through this story real quick, but you podium, and not just podium, but you're at the top of the podium in 21 and 22. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So you came back with a vengeance.
I sure did. Absolutely.
What did finding a competitive outlet help you rediscover your baseline and push harder than you might have pushed without the competitive outlet?
Yes, I will say that having that competitive outlet, it helped me push the baseline because I knew that after a couple years, I was starting to get back to where I felt just generally good. And then I said, all right, we're going to be the fittest on earth and we're going to compete for that title. So you have to push a little bit more. So that was the first time I started having to experiment myself with doing CrossFit 2-a-days and figure out what could I personally do to be able to work out twice a day, just to be used to the fact that I was going to have to do events multiple times a day.
Yeah. And speaking to that analogy of a battery you were using earlier, how do you manage the fatigue in that battery, right? When you're doing a 2-a-day, because that battery is recharging. Neuromuscular athletes know this so well, but that battery is recharging. But at some point you can tap that battery so far that you're now down for a day or two, and you might lose 2 days of training because you did one day too hard.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. So I would say one of the biggest things is that I'd have my main CrossFit workout, which would normally have a lift and one of your standard metabolic conditioning pieces. My second workout would either be kind of like a strength EMOM, so to speak. Maybe it had like sled pushes mixed with like kettlebell swings and strict pull-ups and dips, just things that were good to do under a higher heart rate by making it EMOM style, but you still had some rest built in.
Mm-hmm.
Or I made it strictly cardio. So it wouldn't be, super hard push or a sprint. There were like some intervals where I included, jogging and sprinting, but there was never a point that I felt like I was going to push myself past a limit. Definitely sticking to a 3-day on, 1-day off type schedule when I did that to make sure that I had my rest.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you were competing, what's one of your favorite memories from competing?
The best memory that I have is the 2022 CrossFit Games final event, where it is the final sprint and we do for time 20 calories on the Echo bike into 15 burpee box jump overs into 10 sandbag cleans, just an all out sprint. And I remember Kevin Mayer was in that heat, and he's a big dude. This guy, he can push calories, and this sandbag is going to be like a feather to him. So the only advantage me, a little dude at that time, had was to try to keep up somehow and also be able to sprint on 15 burpee box jump overs.
Yeah.
So I go ahead and I see Kevin gets off the bike first. That's expected. I had to play my game. I get my calories done. I get off the bike, and this is my time. Like, I have to burn these burpees down. And you would have thought like I had strings attached to me from how I was just getting up and over that box. I ended up even doing 16 because I got no rep at one point.
Okay.
Because there was a standard of your feet couldn't come outside the border of the box. Mm-hmm. This was a special version where they said you could get over the box however you wanted.
Yeah.
But your feet could not come outside the border of the box. And I guess with the style I used, the judge saw that one of my reps, my feet might have swung a little too far out and we're over the side of the box. So they no repped me on one. So I did 16 burpees. It is now Kevin and I neck and neck starting our 10 sandbag cleans with a 70-pound sandbag. And the video that they captured of that was just so cool. You see us just going rep for rep. You had to do 2 at a time, move forward, 2 more, move forward, go through until you hit 10. And it came down to the sprint to the finish. We both stuck out the right leg with our timer chip on it. And it ended up being 6/100ths of a second that I crossed that finish line before Kevin. So much that I knew as soon as I dropped that sandbag, I saw where the audience was, and I said, I'm going through that board right in front of me or I'm losing this event. So in the video, you even hear of me running into that board because I was not stopping because I was not losing that event. It was the final event, the last one at the 2022 CrossFit Games, and I wanted to know that I got the first place in that one.
That's awesome, dude. That's a great story. And people can find that video on your Instagram page, on CrossFit's Instagram page. Like it's out there, man. That's a great moment. I'm so excited for you, man. Let's talk about this. So you did the CrossFit Games, and then we don't have time in this podcast to get into what happened in 2023 with classifications and how all that got changed. But people can find that story if they go search it. Barbell Spin had an article on it. There were a lot of articles done around that time when the classification process changed. But then I met you at the 2023 WheelWOD Games, and you were competing in a new category.
Yes, correct. So there was the classification changes in the 2023 CrossFit Games, and through all the things, I was not eligible to compete. However, WheelWOD had developed a new category called standing diagnosed. And at the time, they had neuromuscular major, neuromuscular minor, and then this new category, standing diagnosed.
And that was also the year they added neuromuscular moderate. That's how that's what I get in under. Yeah.
Yes. So they did have that neuromuscular moderate. So that's what I think was great with WheelWOD is they understood there was multiple levels of how people are affected, and they were doing their absolute best to make sure every single level of neuromuscular, disability based on how your condition affects you, they tried to make sure everybody was placed accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
And to have that standing diagnosed division, when they talked to me about it, it made me feel like I had everything back.
Yeah.
Because when that 2023 season announcement came out and I knew I wasn't eligible, it felt like something got ripped away from me that I was super passionate about and dedicated to that I had no say in, and it was upsetting. So to have that given back to me, I knew nothing more than how to eat, sleep, breathe, and train CrossFit and do everything that I could to have the best time of my life, because I knew that anything could be taken away at a second, whether it be when I had my MS diagnosis or just that moment there in 23. Yeah. And I said, I am so thankful to just have this opportunity that I'm in. Let's do it.
Yeah. And so you did it in 23. You didn't do it in 24. You're on the fence about 25. Tell me a little bit about why you're on the fence in 25, because as we were talking about it, your head game is a really helpful, I think, corrective for some people who are really competitive. So tell me about what's going through your head for 2025.
Absolutely. So I signed up for the Open for 2025. I've done the 2 first workouts and we're awaiting the 3rd. And the biggest reason why I loved competing was I was obsessed with it. I loved every second of it. I loved to see how far I can get. I loved to know that every ounce of effort I was putting into every single day was making me the best I could be, and I got to put it on a worldwide stage. It was awesome. It was unforgettable. And honestly, after a couple years of it, you almost realize it is unhealthy in your true fitness to be that dedicated to it. And it is a fantastic thing when you're having fun, when you love it, and when it is everything you want. But there is a time and change when things in your mind start to shift. And you have to say, well, I'm putting in 2 to 3 hours of training a day, 5 days a week. I am eating 5,000 calories a day to make sure that I can do every single thing I need to. I am sacrificing hanging out with my friends, hanging out with my family, and just having a general life beyond this. Yeah. Is this worth it for how much longer? And that is where I had to make a shift in 2024.
Yeah.
And say, I need to step back and I want to go ahead and live life a little more. I want to make sure that I'm still working out, because what CrossFit has done for me is unforgettable. And it just makes me happy and makes me feel healthy, and also helps fight my MS every single day. However, doing this 2025 season, I said, there's a chance. Maybe I want to go back to it. Well, as we're going through these weeks of the Open, I'll talk about the vulnerability of my mindset, where I had seen myself become obsessed. Again, I started to tip my scales towards these workouts. If I wasn't in first place in these first 2 weeks, I didn't feel like I had any value as a human. And that's no way to live.
Yeah.
You have to realize that there is so much more to you than just your fitness, than just what the world says on if you're the fittest or not. And that's where I kind of got into a new mantra of fitness is a feeling. It's not a number. There is no number in the world that can ever define me and how I feel physically and mentally from a good workout. That is on a chart that is defined by you. You might absolutely feel physically and mentally great after a workout. your best friend doing it next to you might feel like total garbage.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
that's completely fine.
Yeah.
But to have those moments where you feel your best physically and mentally, there's no number that said that.
That's right.
Right. It is a feeling. So that is why, once again, I always remember and remind myself when I'm hitting these moments, fitness is a feeling. It's not a number.
Yeah.
And it's still a battle that I deal with. Even in saying this mantra and trying to remind myself what I've done in the past, it almost makes you feel fake if you aren't winning.
Yeah.
And it's a odd feeling to have. I would love to say I have the confidence in myself to know that I am fit. I am good. I am fine. This number will never define me, but it'll always creep back in. And that's life. You know, the bad stuff always tries to creep back in, and you have to try to maintain that good core center value that, you know, you hold on to tight, that defines who you are as a person. And you can't go wrong if you hang on to that.
Yep. People around me will know I love a good mantra, and I love that mantra. So that's great. Fitness is a feeling, not a number. Thanks for that, Brett. All right.
Absolutely.
So I've got a lightning round for you. All
Sweet.
right. Here we go. What are you obsessed with right now? It can
Working
be
out
art.
still.
It could, working out. Working out. Okay, deal. Working out. I love it. Awesome. If you were on a deserted island then, and you had to come up with a workout, what would it be?
It would be 20 rounds for time, 200-meter run to 15 line-facing burpees.
Whoa, dude, savage.
Yeah.
Savage. Yeah. Wow. Okay. But you would draw the line in the sand though with your foot, right?
Correct.
You'd be like, okay, we got the line in the sand. I gotcha.
Yep. Strategic.
If I got it. If you could pick the music every day in the gym, what would be playing?
80s rock, hair metal.
Okay. A band in particular or a song in particular?
Motley Crue, Poison, Def Leppard, Bon Jovi.
Yeah.
Dokken, because you're always rocking with Dokken.
I like it. All right. Awesome. And final question. What is your go-to pre-competition snack?
Banana. Banana is the first thing, because there's times that personally, if my body has too much in it, the adrenaline kicks in and I go vomit it out.
Yep.
And then I go work out and I have the best event of my life. It's happened a handful of times.
Yeah.
And it's hilarious.
So I was not competitive at all before starting competitive CrossFit, like physically competitive. I was always like kind of like mentally competitive, doing like math counts, academic team, that kind of stuff. But like physical competition, that icky belly feeling that you get before competing, it never goes away, does it?
No.
Yeah.
Every single time.
So gnarly.
Every single time. And if you have just a little too much food because your prior event, you had your post-workout snack to get you back and regulated, maybe it didn't digest enough and now your adrenaline's pumping again, you're about to go again. My body's like, it's got to get rid of it somehow. So I've had those moments.
Wow. All right, dude. 2 final questions. If someone new to adaptive CrossFit is listening to this, what's one piece of advice you would give them?
Just get started. I don't care if it's just going for a walk around your neighborhood. I don't care if it's just laying on the ground to try to do 5 push-ups, because you always have to start somewhere. And if I can go from being able to walk to be able to do all the things I could do with my body functioning, have it taken away after 21 years, and then have to learn how to do it all again, so can you.
Yeah, that's true. So can you. And what is one thing you would say to your younger self if you could go talk to them?
You're about to do some really cool stuff. That would be what I would say, is you don't know what life has in store for you, but man, it's going to be really freaking cool.
I love that, Brett. Hey, dude, thanks so much for being on this podcast. You are really freaking cool, and I'm really glad we got to have this time together, man.
Hey, thanks so much, man. I'm glad I got to be on here.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode. I really enjoyed Brett's story, but especially because it's way different than mine. I was born with my disability. Brett found out about his when he was 21 and was lifting a ton of weight at the gym, and then one day just couldn't do it. I mean, I can't imagine what that would be like. But I know for many of you who listen, you can imagine what that's like, to have a before and an after moment. That's one of the things that makes adaptive athletes unique among themselves. We don't all have the same story, but we all have a shared story of what it means to overcome adversity. If Brett's story moved you, share this episode with someone who might need to hear it. And if you're just getting started with adaptive fitness, take Brett's advice. Start somewhere. You can catch Brett's epic 2022 finish line sprint that he mentioned on his Instagram page, and stay tuned as he continues to write the next chapter of his fitness journey. Until next time, remember, Fitness is a feeling, not a number. I loved that mantra. Hey, I'm Matt Hotho, and I'll see you guys next time.